afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining me today as I present my final dissertation defense. My name is Crystal Williams, and the title of this study is called A Phenomenological Approach Exploring the Impact of Verbal Expression on Anger Intensity. I also want to briefly share with you how I arrived at this study. I've always had a fascination with emotions, why we have them, how they're managed, how they're expressed, how they're processed. And in that curiosity, I presented my chairs with the initial research proposal to look at all the emotions or to just study emotions in general. That was met with really good advice. My chair shared with me and explained that I needed to narrow down the emotions to pick one. I also needed to read as much research as I could on that emotion to determine what hasn't been done, and then to make sure that I could do the research study in a timely manner. So that was a really good insight for me. That definitely put me in another direction where I started to then look at all the emotions. When I came to anger, particularly, I knew that that was the one. When I think about all the violence and aggression that's been perpetrated in society, I felt interested as well as compelled to see how I could use this research opportunity to study anger. I also thought too, I've heard of the sayings, somebody just snapped, or they saw red, or they went off, or they went from 0 to 100, or blew up. And in my own self and curiosity as a researcher, some part of that didn't feel completely false. So that was the point in which I said, this is what I want to explore. I really want to get to the root of anger, and I really want to understand what compels a person to become angry, hence this research study. So this presentation will take you on a journey deconstructing anger and the characteristics of anger to arrive at how verbal expression impacts anger intensity. So this is an overview of the presentation. We will discuss the introduction, which is going to talk about the topic of anger, highlighting the problem, purpose of the study, definition of terms, and the significance for this research study. Chapter 2 is the literature review, which is going to break down what we know about anger, anger intensity, and verbal expression, as well as discuss anger characteristics, gender differences, anger expression styles, dimensions of intensity, the theoretical framework, which is a psychoanalysis. It's going to be used to bridge the variables together. Chapter 3, the methodology section, will discuss why the qualitative phenomenological approach was chosen. The research questions will be established, the method of the study, participant selection, instrumentation, limitations, delimitations, and data analysis will be discussed in Chapter 3. It's going to lay the foundation for the research. Chapter 4, the data analysis, will discuss the demographic information, the interview questions, themes, and the participant responses. Chapter 5 presents the summary, conclusions, recommendations, and discusses the themes, interview questions, research questions, and the themes discovered through the data analysis, and the implications for future research, followed by conclusions and the final summary. So Chapter 1, anger. It's one of the least explored emotions compared to anxiety and depression. A lot of attention has gone to anxiety and depression, not so much anger in the capacity that it's been generalized, such as anxiety and depression. Anger can be activated from a real or imagined offense. Anger is often interwoven and disguised in sarcasm, passive aggression, and cynicism. That makes it very elusive and potentially dangerous. Each expression of sarcasm, passive aggression, and cynicism could indicate suppressed or repressed anger in need of processing and verbal expression. Anger has 4 components: intensity, physical effect, cause of anger, and emotional expression. These components are important because intensity, physical effect, cause of emotion, and expression are specifically examined in this research study. So, picture, if you will, this metaphor to visually understand the phenomenon of anger intensity, anger, and verbal expression. Imagine a tea kettle. Imagine water. Imagine fire. And imagine steam. The tea kettle represents the human body. The water represents the anger. The fire represents any trigger or situation that provokes anger. And the steam represents the degree of anger intensity. Now, as the water is heated in the tea kettle, steam builds and is released through the small opening. This research explored the impact of verbal expression on anger intensity, aimed at reducing residual anger. In other words, if unexpressed anger can increase anger intensity, conversely, expressing anger may decrease anger intensity. The problem background: people are angry, and tempers are short. External displays of anger are more pervasive and becoming frequently intense, resulting in violence, murder, and death, according to the FBI. In 2002, a violent crime, which the FBI considers murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, occurred every 26.2 seconds. So probably in another 5 seconds, one of these violent crimes will have occurred. In 2011, 62.4% of crimes were aggravated assaults. And in 2011, 42.9% of victims were murdered during verbal arguments. Some degree of anger, according to Ramirez and Andrew, is likely to be found in those that engage in aggressive acts. Anger is often viewed as negative because of the external manifestation. For example, you have yelling and shouting, which is an expression of anger, bullying, hitting and fighting, murder, and terrorizing. And you can see a progression. Yelling and shouting may not seem as severe as terrorizing, but it's all grouped together because some component of anger resides in those behaviors. Anger is not inherently negative. It can be expressed through constructive or destructive behaviors. And anger becomes a residual problem, according to Bush as well as Freud, that when it's suppressed, unexpressed, or repressed. So the purpose of the study is to offer insight into anger intensity, and verbal expression. It's to add depth to the current research on anger. It's to broaden and understand how anger is subjectively interpreted, intellectualized, and conceptualized. And it's to provide researched data to develop methods and interventions that combat the suppression of anger intensity or repressed anger. So the definition of terms. Particular to this research, anger is defined as a strong response to a threat or perception of a threat. Anger in is the tendency to recognize and acknowledge experiencing anger, but to inhibit verbal or physical expression. Anger control is the attempt to control the expression of anger. Anger out is the external expression of anger, verbally or physically, without restraint. Also, this is an important note in this study. Anger intensity is not inherently, anger intensity and intensity of anger will be interchangeably used throughout this dissertation, both with the same meaning. Catharsis, the method of emotional expression leading to release and or healing. Intensity, varying degrees of arousal, experienced psychologically after the emotion is triggered. Repression is the pulling of thoughts from the conscious into the unconscious to lessen the degree of impact. In other words, it's an individual actively denying feelings associated with the emotion or the event they experienced. Suppression is pushing unwanted information out of one's immediate awareness. In other words, choosing to disengage or not deal with the emotion or the situation experienced. And lastly, verbal expression, which for this research is the non-aggressive verbal expression in a calm manner using a clear and concise tone of voice. So the significance and justification for conducting this study. To date, there have been fewer research studies devoted to the emotion of anger, specifically anger intensity. This study has the capacity to revitalize the importance of verbal expression among laypersons and in the psychological community. And advancements in behavioralism have shifted psychotherapy away from investigating subjective feelings that lead to self-awareness and towards objectively measuring behavior. So something is getting lost in the translation of the therapy process. So this research study looks to add more credence and validation to verbal expression in the therapy process and among the layperson. Chapter 2, Literature Review. I want to read a quote from Freud. Unexpressed emotions never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. So anger, according to Darwin, is necessary or was necessary for survival. And Avro reported a little further along in 1983 that everyone experiences anger from time to time. In the psychological community, most practitioners have reported feeling less comfortable working with anger disordered clients because anger can generate a variety of behaviors considered disturbed, maladaptive, and destructive, as well as problematic. And there's a lack of knowledge regarding effective interventions, according to Senai. This literature review will explore past and current research on anger, anger intensity, and verbal expression. The study examined anger and its characteristics to understand how each participant experienced anger, what triggers an individual to anger, negative consequences of anger, anger intensity, and how verbal expression could impact the participants' intensity of anger level. So what research theories contribute to anger expression? There's the appraisal and perception of events theory that says anger is determined as situations are appraised. Action tendencies gave us the idea that anger is motivated by biological activation and facial expression. Defense initiatives state that anger is actively activated by the need to fight, and social regulation says that anger serves to establish and enforce social boundaries. These two approaches are what we are going to focus on for this study. The dimensional model, which states that emotions are experienced based on two variables: valence, which is how helpful versus harmful the experience is that you're feeling, the emotion, and intensity, which ranges from mild to severe. So these two variables determine when a person will express emotions and how, to what degree. And then Spielberger contributed that anger expression falls into three categories. He gave us anger in, also known as suppression, anger control, which is a very controlled response, and anger out, which is expressed using aggression, either verbally or physically. So in anger episodes, according to Casanova and Sadowski, when anger episodes are frequent, intense, which is a variable that we're using in this study, or enduring, it can lead to negative consequences, such as aggression, damage to interpersonal relationships, family violence, health problems, and subjective distress. Anger represents one of the most challenging emotions in psychotherapy. to the research, and there are several contributors to this thought process or this theory. There are 5 codified reasons that elicit anger. The first reason is frustration or unnecessary convenience, material causes, someone stealing property or destroying property of yours, physical threat, assault or violence against one's person, rejection, unfair treatment, and verbal insults. Anger can also be triggered by specific external stimuli or one's internal sensations. Yet anger itself is not classified as a diagnosable disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, which is the Bible for clinicians to diagnose disorders. Now, these variables are very important to this research study. The emotion of anger challenges one in 4 areas. Affectively, which contributes to the magnitude of anger when prompted by a situation, basically asks you how you feel about that or how you feel about what's happening. Behaviorally, reactions are often based on perception, which is directly connected to intensity, emotional experience, and expression. Cognitively, influences perceptions, beliefs, ideas, reasoning, and choice. What do you think about what's happened is basically how cognitively we are impacted or challenged. And physiologically, anger sets in motion changes that occur all throughout the body, specifically activating the fight, the flight, or the freeze response. Anger and gender. Anger is often governed by social and cultural norms. Socially, anger is considered a masculine emotion, yielding acceptance when displayed in men versus women. Traditionally, women are taught that displaying anger is undesirable and socially unacceptable. Lastly, males are encouraged to act out and express anger, while females are guided to talk it out or suppress it. So these are the norms that we've been accustomed to for some time, even as late as 2012. Anger and verbal expression. Anger is often viewed as harmful and therefore routinely suppressed or displaced. Communication is the most important factor in eliminating anger, according to Camry 2004. When anger is experienced, it can either be expressed, repressed, or suppressed versus Vonnegut 2011. And those who verbally express anger can be perceived as threatening, powerful, and or dominant, according to Lerner and Timmons 2006. Anger and destructive behavior. Anger expression can contribute significantly to destructive behavior. Mental distress and maladjustment, prejudices towards race and sexual orientation, relationship problems, road rage, and workplace dysfunction, to name a few. Dimensions of intensity. Intensity is considered an important aspect of emotional expression, the emotional experience, and behavioral response. It's also one of the central concepts in this research study. Suppression, the expression of emotion, can create a rebound effect, generating more intensity. Intensity of emotion and emotional expression offers a tangible understanding of one's emotional experience. And intensity of emotion is a salient feature of emotions. However, it is yet to be explored with any theoretical significance. That is interesting too, because considering how intensity impacts emotions, how it impacts how we respond, there's yet to be a theory that's been offered to the psychological community to begin to help establish a framework. Now, this particular research will use the psychoanalysis theory to bridge the variables together. The psychoanalytic theory explores 3 states of the mind: impulse, defenses, and expression. It also contributes to, according to this theory, adaptive or maladaptive functioning. Now, the 3 states of mind, you have the conscious, the preconscious, or the subconscious mind, which is accessible to one's awareness once attention is directed. as I see it, it's the holding place for suppressed anger. Conscious mind acts as a guard to determine what thoughts will gain awareness. I see it as the conscious mind acknowledging the anger offense. And then the unconscious mind stores primitive and instinctual impulses, and repressed anger is stored in the place of the unconscious mind. Now here's a graph of me illustrating the concept. So a person has an experience that makes them upset. The conscious mind acknowledges the offense, and then it makes a decision. Is it safe enough for me to express this? Or maybe it's safe enough, but not right now, or not to this person. So then it'll go into the holding place of the preconscious mind. The unconscious mind will then hold repressed emotions or anger that says, it's not safe, it's not ever going to be safe, and I can't ever share this with this person. So that'll go into a repressed state. Once a person has an experience and acknowledges the experience, it'll come back up from the preconscious mind, from the holding place, to allow catharsis or verbal expression to then release the emotion if the person feels safe and comfortable. So the impulse defenses. Repression, again, is pulling the thoughts from the conscious into the unconscious to decrease the degree of anxiety, painful memories, and impulses experienced in the present moment. Or in other words, an individual actively denies the feelings associated with the situation or the event being experienced. Suppression is pushing mental thoughts or unwanted information out of one's immediate awareness, or in other words, choosing to disengage or not deal with the events or situation experienced. And lastly, catharsis. It's described as the feeling of release or relief that diminishes emotional symptoms. Chapter 3, the methodology section. This design used a qualitative research design with a phenomenological approach. Constructs are anger, anger intensity, and verbal expression. And the variables are anger intensity and verbal expression. So the qualitative research design was chosen and used to understand the what that's being experienced by the person. What triggers an individual to anger? Why was anger experienced by this person? And the how. How does verbal expression impact anger intensity? How is the person feeling as a result of the anger in their bodies? How do they typically respond to anger? How did they respond in this situation? The phenomenological approach exposes the hidden composition in the meaning of the individual or social experience. This type of research allowed me as the researcher to understand the why, specifically what made the person angry again, what was the physiological impact of the experience. The research questions in this study explored 3 specific questions. The first question, can verbal expression reduce intensity of anger? The second question, does the relationship with the antagonist impact the intensity of anger? And the third question, is there a gender difference in anger intensity after verbal expression? So this study examined how anger is subjectively experienced and to what degree verbal expression can reduce anger intensity. The method of data collection used the behavioral observations and interviews to explore the phenomenon of anger, intensity of anger, and verbal expression. The study chose to use a sample population from the greater Los Angeles area with a total of 9 adults. The adults were chosen out of a pool of people that haven't experienced therapeutic interventions and don't conduct any type of therapy process. I really wanted to choose a layperson for this research because I wanted to understand intimately if a person that experiences anger has a natural inclination to express it or process it. And I also wanted to understand and harvest the raw experience of anger, because that's really what the hope in this research study could contribute. Really another way to allow a person to diminish some of the intensity that they're feeling so that it doesn't have to result in immediate action of violence or aggression towards another person. I also chose the convenience and snowball sampling, which the convenience sample solicited participants using flyers, and I'll definitely talk more about that in the next couple of slides. So a total of 12 participants responded, and actually a total of 9 participants responded to the flyer. 6 of the participants met the criteria. 3 of the participants did not meet the criteria, and 3 were referred using the snowball sampling that met the criteria. The participant selection was orally determined, and I'll read the script and talk about the script. And the instrumentation used to collect the data was a semi-structured interview format, face-to-face, and it was 10 interview questions. The interview process lasted between 30 and 45 minutes. And I observed behavior, and I used the Navivo software program to store, transcribe, develop codes and themes, and to make connections. So this is the flyer that was posted in 3 locations in the Los Angeles area. I explained that I was a graduate student seeking volunteers to participate. I gave the criteria of them being able to answer yes to experiencing a strong emotion, and if they were comfortable expressing it, sharing it. And I determined through the flyer that the person needed to be 18 years or older, male and female, with no current or prior experience in receiving or providing counseling or mental health treatment. I gave the phone number down below, and I posted the flyer in 3 locations. Midas Muffler in Beverly Hills, which I was very grateful for them. It was posted in the entrance in the front window. The second location was the Laundrette on Beverly Boulevard. The flyer was posted in the front of the laundromat. I figured people would be there and be able to look around and find something to read, namely my flyer. And then the third location was Starbucks on Centinela in Los Angeles. And the flyer was posted in the front entrance on the cork board. So this is the telephone script that was used when participants responded to the flyer. I expressed my name, expressed again, I was seeking volunteers. There was no compensation provided other than the person feeling relief after being heard and validated. I asked for participants to be 18 or older, and that's where I determined if they met criteria. And from that meeting of the criteria, I called and set up an appointment and determined the time and date. And of the participants, again, 9 responded from the flyer, and 6 responded from the flyer. 9 responded from the flyer. 3 were snowball sampled. 3 did not meet criteria to participate. The potential participants were informed that the interview process would take up to 45 minutes, and there would be 10 questions. After eligibility was determined, an interview time and date was established. So this was the permission agreement that was used at the public library. Actually, the West Hollywood Public Library is where the research interviews were conducted. I was able to reserve the room, and they allow you to reserve it for free. It just has to be done they only allow 2 hours per day, and you can reserve the room every day as long as it's not already reserved. So it's a first come, first serve. So I was able to strategically schedule my participants in and around that time and date that was available, and thankfully it was successful. The West Hollywood Library provided a space, a meeting room similar to this, maybe a little bit smaller, with a closed door, so it provided confidentiality, safety, containment, and privacy. This was the informed consent used. It definitely talked about who I was, my position in this research study as a doctoral student, um, why they'd be participating, any potential risks, the time it would take, how long the study was being conducted. It talked about confidentiality aspects, the ability to withdraw at any time without any type of punitive um, repercussions. And then it further gave my contact information, my chair's contact information, and the IRB department chair, if need be, to contact. So I had each participant sign and date the informed consent. And after that, we started to ask these questions. So these were the 10 research questions that were asked to each participant. And I'll definitely break down each question as we go along in this study in chapter 4. This was the behavioral observation checklist that was used. I definitely observed or looked to observe any type of elevated tone of voice, the use of profanity, shaking legs, tapping fingers, clenched jaw, tightened fist, frowns, and scowls. These were, according to the research study, some of the behaviors that exist when a person is displaying anger. I also created a space for any type of bias that may come up in the interview as I'm sitting and talking. With this qualitative design, because the researcher is very important and an important instrument to this type of study, it was very critical that I be aware of any bias that may come up and then notate it. Lastly, the researcher interviews, the space was available in case I saw something that wasn't noted on the list, the observation checklist, as well as some extenuating circumstance that may have come up. So the limitations in this study, look at the aspects that the researcher has no control over. For example, the data collection. In the qualitative research design, typically interviewing and behavioral observations are used. The sample selection, convenience, and snowball were most appropriate to the qualitative research design. The size, which according to Cresswell, 2006, they give the appropriate size of a qualitative research to be anywhere between 5 and 25 participants. The researcher bias, again, I discussed that in the behavioral observation checklist, where bracketing would acknowledge and document any type of bias that may come up for me as the researcher. The delimitations are the aspects of the research design that are within the control of the researcher. So the sample population, me choosing adults versus children. Children are still developing psychologically, so it may not necessarily, they were not appropriate to this research study as I look to study adults. The clinical status, again, I wanted to choose the layperson. I wanted to see how raw anger is experienced without having any type of clinical interventions to prohibit the expression. And I also wanted to understand verbal expression so that a person, a layperson, could speak very sincerely about their experience. Verbal expression was the mode that I used to determine if anger intensity could be effective. And this was utilized if the intensity, this was utilized to determine if the anger intensity could be decreased or if it even increased. And the research method, again, the qualitative research design uses interventions, which is really interviews and behavioral observations, which is used to gain a deeper understanding regarding anger, anger intensity, and verbal expression. So the research method. The data analysis approach really just breaks down how I transcribe the information from the interviews, how I analyze the data, what I look for in terms of themes, and how I established the themes based on what the research said or what the research reflected. I also used a 6-step analysis process, which is also important to qualitative research. Because qualitative research uses words and it really looks to understand the human experience, numbers, statistical data, would not sufficiently provide us with that type of in-depth information. So I used a 6-step process to analyze the data. I first organized and prepared the data for analysis, meaning making sure that I properly labeled the participant's pseudonym with the observation checklist. So I matched and paired the two together. Then I thoroughly read through all of the data to ensure it was transcribed correctly, as well as not being any typos. The third step was then to begin to import the information into the Navivo software process. After reading and analyzing the data, I started to discover patterns and themes. So those patterns and themes were put into the Navivo software for it to then begin to match participants based on the theme that I've discovered. The fourth step was for the software program to synthesize the data, which again is, I put the themes in and used Navivo to tell me that maybe participant 3 and participant 5 both expressed a degree of anger that was used the words livid, or road rage, or mother. It looked for family members. So those were the types of themes that were discovered, and I'll definitely speak more about that in the Chapter 4 analysis. The fifth step used the program to analyze and synthesize the themes and to convey the findings, producing charts, some of them, through Navivo. And then the step 6 used my interpretation of the data to come to the conclusions, and that will be discussed also. Chapter 4 will highlight the participant demographics, those that volunteered to participate. I'll discuss the demographic information. I'll discuss the interview questions and themes, the actual data results, and the results from the behavioral checklist that I discussed. So this is the demographic information for the research study. I actually had 9 participants. The age range was from 26 to 70, and all of the participants had no prior or current experience providing psychotherapy or receiving psychotherapy. It was a diverse group of participants. I had 5 African American participants, 2 biracial participants, and 2 Caucasian participants. The participants were assigned their pseudonym based on the order in which they responded and met criteria for this study. So for example, participant 1 was the first participant to meet criteria and respond to the research study. Participant 2 was the second person that responded and met criteria, and so forth. So the interview questions in this study, there were 10 questions, and the questions were in a semi-structured format, asking the person to think of a situation that created anger and to rate the intensity on a scale of 1 to 10. After the question was asked, the person thought about the situation, and then I asked them to verbally say out loud the intensity rating. Next, I asked them to describe the situation in detail, to include the meaning of why they got angry. I asked the participant how many times has the exact or similar situation happened. I asked the participant to describe who was involved and their relationship to the antagonist. I asked the participant to describe how they responded or reacted and why. I asked that they pick 3 words that come to mind as they express their anger about the situation. I asked how they typically verbally express anger. I asked that they describe any physiological reaction or response to the anger situation, to describe 3 negative outcomes experienced as a result of the anger intensity, and how they felt verbally expressing the anger experience today. Finally, I asked the participant to re-rate their intensity. After answering all these questions, then I asked them to re-rate their intensity based on the situation that they discussed. The first question, think of a situation that created anger and rate the intensity on a scale of 1 to 10. And then, after the rating, describe the situation in detail to include the meaning of why you got angry. This question sought to understand individually and collectively what experiences generate anger, and are there any similarities in the meaning for why people experienced anger? Also, I wanted to understand how anger intensity is subjectively calculated. So each participant was able to score their own intensity based on how they felt. So here are some examples of the theme, which was threat or perception of the threat. The first theme discovered that none of the participants had a threat of bodily harm or the perception of threat. However, they still got angry for various reasons. The first participant shared that he got angry because his brother went through his trunk and didn't ask for permission. The second participant discussed her boss criticizing her and yelling at her, but not understanding all that she does on the job. Participant 3 discussed her sister being judgmental about a situation, judgmental towards her about a situation. Participant 4 and 5 talked about an experience with the phone company. Participant 6 discussed being forced to move abruptly and not by his own fault. Participant 7 was recently told by his mother about how he changed his jobs and was very invalidating. Participant 8 discussed a friend using information to gain but not saying thank you or even giving credit that it was not, it was the participant's idea. And participant 9 made plans with a friend and the friend canceled at the last minute. So as you can see from the participant responses, there were a variety of reasons that generated anger, none of which had anything to do with the threat of bodily harm or the perception of threat to bodily harm. And this is the graph that depicts the anger intensity ratings. Participant 1, participant 4, participant 6, and participant 8 all rated 10, an anger intensity rating of 10. And this table shows each participant's level of anger intensity before verbal expression. The second theme from question 1 was intrapersonal construct. And this construct really was curious because it found that although the participants were justified in feeling angry and articulating their anger, all expressed feeling a negative internal response versus validating their anger regarding the offense. For example, participant 1 expressed, I felt disrespected. Participant 2 expressed, I felt judged. Participant 4, I felt disregarded. Participant 5, I felt disregarded. Participant 8, I felt disregarded. Participant 6, I felt disregarded. Participant 8, I felt betrayed and used. And participant 9, I was disappointed, discouraged, and let down. And this is the chart that codified the participant responses into 5 general areas: disrespected, devalued, disregarded, betrayed, and disappointed. Interview question 3, how many times has the exact or similar situation happened to you? This question sought to understand if repeated anger offenses of the exact or similar nature contribute to anger intensity. This data was helpful in determining the effect and or influence compounded anger experiences have on anger intensity. The theme generated from the question was multiple episodes. For example, participant 1 reported this experience happened 20 times. Participant 2 reported 2 times a month. Participant 3 reported at least 15 times. Participant 5 reported it only happened once. Participant 4, it's only happened one. Participant 4, it's only happened once. Participant 5 reported 3 times. Participant 6 reported the experience happening 1 time. Participant 7, I feel like it's happened thousands of times, were his exact words. Participant 8, over 10 times, and participant 9, 2 times. So the theme just showed that multiple occurrences happened. regarding the anger situation among 7 of the 9 participants. And this is a pie chart. 5 of the participants experienced the exact or similar situation 10 times or less. 2 of the participants experienced the anger situation exactly or similarly 2 times. 1 participant experienced the anger situation less than 20 times, and 1 participant experienced the anger situation over 30 times. So the 4th question asks the participants to describe who was involved in their anger situation and their relationship to the antagonist. This question sought to understand the relationship among the participant and the antagonist involved in the anger situation. The data from this question would provide insight in determining if the relationship to the antagonist impacts anger intensity. So the theme generated from this question is family and friends, because 6 of the 9 participants discussed anger situations of their own volition dealing with friends or family. They actually knew the antagonist. Participant 1 shared an experience with his brother. Participant 2 shared an experience with her boss. Participant 3, her sister. Participant 4, 5, and 6 were all business entities. Participant 7, mother. Participant 8, a friend. And participant 9, a friend. And this is the chart depicting the antagonist relationship to the participant. So again, 1 was the boss, 3 were business entities, 1 was a brother, mother, and sister, and 2 participants had anger situations with friends. Question 5 in theme, describe how you reacted or responded to the situation. This question sought to understand the immediate reaction of the anger situation or situational anger, and to understand if this response is consistent with the participant's typical reaction to the anger situation, or if the antagonist impacted how the participant responded or reacted to the situation. The theme is follow through, and what the research discovered is that the majority of the participants did not share with the antagonist why they were angry, or even what the anger was all about. Participant 1 shared that he acted out and was totally out of line. He said, I was very ugly using obscenities and gestures. Participant 2, I did not express how pissed off I felt. Participant 3, I did not say anything. Participant 4, I yelled and stood up. I wanted to throw the phone because I was so mad. Participant 5, I did not say anything. Participant 6, I did not express my anger. Participant 7, I yelled back at her and I responded to her totally different than anybody else in the world that I respond to. Participant 8, I never talked to my friend about manipulating me. And participant 9, I did not tell her how angry and disappointed I felt. So the graph here depicts that 6 of the participants did not express their anger, whether to the antagonist or even out loud. And then the 3 participants actually yelled or responded out loud to the anger situation. Question number 6 and theme. Pick 3 words that come to mind as you express your anger about the situation. This question sought to understand the unconscious thought process displayed through words. The word choices were then analyzed individually and collectively to find any commonalities and then to generate what the word choice may conclude. So the word choices here show that 5 of the 9 participants actually used similar words. The words were frustrated or frustration, disappointment, upset, anger, or angry. And the theme discovered from this was that there was a degree of sadness that was expressed about the anger situation. Not speaking to my brother made the participant 1 feel sad. Participant 7 said that he was sad that he felt like his mother was still alive and that he wished that she would die first. And then participant 8 reported after feeling betrayed that he was sad that he didn't recognize being manipulated. And these are the words that were used, a graph to show that 3 people used the word anger, 2 people used the word disappointment, 2 people used the word frustrated, and 2 people used the word upset. Question 7 and theme, how do you typically express your anger? Now this question sought to distinguish any variation in the typical anger expression when compared to situational anger responses and the antagonist relationship. So this data would allow situational responses to be compared with typical responses to determine the impact the situation and or antagonist relationship has on verbal expression. How do you typically express your anger? So the theme was avoidance. And the participants shared, participant 1 shared, I'm typically silent or I suppress it. Participant 2, I don't say anything, I suppress it. Participant 3, I use a lot of control. Participant 4, I express my anger in a controlled manner. Participant 5, I usually wouldn't say anything. Participant 6, I don't typically say anything, I hold it in. Participant 7, sometimes I shut down and walk away, I suppress it. Participant 8, I get very angry when I try to express my anger effusively. And participant 9, I typically express my anger in a controlled manner. So what the data showed us was that 5 of the 9 participants typically suppress anger, and 4 of the participants used a control manner in expressing their anger. Question number 8, describe any physiological reaction or response to the anger situation. This question sought to understand how anger triggers physiological reactions and then to understand if there is an impact on anger intensity assessment. Are they aware of what they're feeling, or is it a response that is completely oblivious to them? And this is the chart, the theme was physiology. Participant 1, I get antsy, out of control, and jittery. Participant 2 reported feeling tense. Participant 3 reported tension. Participant 4, my blood was boiling and I felt hot. Participant 5 reported I didn't notice any change. Participant 6, my stomach started churning and my blood was boiling. Participant 7, blood pressure goes up and I feel on edge. Participant 8 was the only participant that acknowledged an emotional response instead of physiologically. And he said, I felt more disappointed in myself because I allowed this to happen. Participant 9 reported tense. So the chart shows that 3 of the participants reported tension. 1 reported no change, 1 reported jittery, 1 reported emotional reaction versus physiological. He reported disappointment in self. 1 participant reported blood pressure rising, and 2 participants reported the blood boiling. Question number 9. Describe 3 negative outcomes you've experienced as a result of your anger intensity. This question sought to understand if negative consequences had an impact on anger expression. In other words, would an individual who did not experience any negative consequences be more likely to verbally express anger? Or would a person that experienced negative consequences be more inclined to suppress anger, thereby possibly impacting anger intensity? And the theme is consequences. All of the 9 participants reported experiencing a consequence as a result of anger intensity. And the consequences were broken down into two categories, external or internal. So participant one discussed the consequences of being incarceration, unemployment, and close encounters with death. Participant two, I walk around feeling bad like I want to explode, so that's more emotional. Participant three, a wedge between my sisters and tension, which is more external. Participant four, stress in my body. So he's the only participant that had a physiological consequence to the negative experience of anger. Participant five, lost friends, isolation. Participant six, I bottle up my feelings. Participant seven, another physical, actually aggression that's been that response. The participant one and participant seven showed aggression or external acts of aggression or anger externally through fighting or incarceration. Participant eight, I got a bad reputation. It changed how I see myself. I used drugs. And participant nine, isolation, getting down on myself, and feeling helpless. So here's the graph depicting the consequences. 5 of the participants reported consequences that were emotional. One of the participants gave the biological consequence of feeling stress. One participant talked about having bad or poor relationships. And 2 participants talked about external expressions being incarceration and fighting. Question number 10, how did you feel verbally expressing your anger today? This question sought to understand if verbally expressing the anger situation produced a cathartic release. In other words, did verbally expressing the anger situation impact participants positively to provide relief from the anger intensity? And the theme was catharsis. The majority of the participants reported feeling good or feeling a release after verbal expression. So participant 1, I felt relieved. Participant 2, I feel good talking about it. Participant 3, good. I'll probably feel good all day today because of this. Participant 4, it felt good. I felt relieved. Now, participant 5 expressed that it brings it back up again talking about it, but I'm not mad. So he was reactivated. Participant 6, when I think about it, it really pisses me off. They were reactivated also. Participant 7, this feels good. Participant 8 was neutral. He didn't express either feeling good or bad, but he did say it gives him an outlet. And participant 9, it felt good. And this is the graph depicting their responses. So 6 of the participants expressed feeling a release. 2 of the participants were reactivated, and 1 participant had a release. He said it gave him an outlet, but it was neutral. He didn't report either good or bad. Now the theme of the last question, to ask the participants to re-rate their anger intensity, was anger intensity reduction. And as you can see, this question thought to use the original intensity rating before verbal expression as a measurement to collect data on the impact of verbal expression on intensity of anger after verbal expression. So the common theme was that 7 of the 9 participants did reduce their anger intensity. As you can see, participant 1, the initial rating was a 10, which dropped 9 points. Participant 2 started out with an 8, but said that they were at a 10, so their anger increased. Participant 4 initially rated, participant 3 initial rating was a 4, decreased by 3 points to a 1. Participant 4 initial rating was a 10, dropped down 7 points. Participant 5, the initial rating was a 4, and it dropped 1 point to a 3. Participant 6, the initial rating was a 10, and it remained the same at 10 after verbal expression. Participant 7, the initial rating was a 7, reduced 3 points to a 4. Participant 8, The initial rating was a 10, and it reduced to a 7, so it dropped 3 points. And participant 9, the initial rating was a 6, and it dropped 3 points to a 3. And this is a chart depicting the anger intensity before expression, which is the black, and after expression is the brownish gray color. So you can see, again, participant 1 had an anger reduction of 9 points. Participant 2, the anger was increased by 2 points. Participant 3 reduced their anger intensity by 3 points. Participant 4, after verbal expression, reduced their anger intensity by 7 points. Participant 1, 1 point. Participant 6 remained the same. Participant 7 dropped by 3 points in their anger intensity. Participant 8 dropped 3 points in their anger intensity, and participant 9 dropped 3 points in their anger intensity after verbal expression. So lastly, the behavioral observations are what was noted as the researcher observed the participants. So only 2 participants showed behavioral reactions when verbally expressing the anger situation during the interview. Participant 1 displayed scowls and leg shaking as he expressed the anger situation. And participant 2 displayed frowning as she expressed the anger situation displayed. And after the expression and the interview was coming to a close, she displayed crying after the expression. Participant 1 and participant 2 both reported typically suppressing anger expression, but displayed anger expression through body language and facial expression. So this may have provided additional relief to the participants after verbal expression. So chapter 5, the conclusions, discussion questions and themes, the research questions and themes, the recommendations for future research, and the final summary will be discussed. So the interview questions 1 and 2, the findings were that anger once represented the need for survival and now seems to serve to primarily alert distress individually. Anger intensity is subjectively calculated, so although we'd like to find a way to streamline anger intensity, it's subjectively calculated. So our interventions are going to have to be more universal versus targeting anger intensity specifically. I think we want to look at the reasons behind the anger, and I think we also want to look at the ability to verbally express anger, and I'll talk more about those findings. Although the participants felt justified in their anger, all expressed a negative internal response versus feeling validated in their anger regarding the offense. So it seems to me too that a person feels angry and they're justified in the anger, but depending on how family members respond to them, there's like a negative internal rumination that occurs that I think impacts the anger between the family members, and I'll talk more about that when we get to antagonists. Participants appeared reluctant to affirm their anger, thus invalidating their anger experience. So the findings from question 3 were that anger can be evoked based on past experiences that influence how future anger experiences are perceived. Anger may have a compounding effect impacting anger intensity, and anger may be compounded with one's internal cognitions that increase anger intensity after the offense. Lastly, the initial unexpressed anger from unresolved conflicts could potentially produce compounded anger intensity. Interview question 4 and findings. Anger happens frequently, but with family and friends, there seems to be the expectation that conflict, either intentional or unintentional, should be avoided. Anger expressed creates emotional and sometimes physical distance among family and friends. And suppressing anger intensity among friends and family may have a functional and protective effect for participants, but it can also have it can also negatively impact those relationships. Interview question 4, anger creates a subjective sense of vulnerability that's difficult to express, thereby impacting one's decision to communicate the anger offense. Anger, when expressed, could have potential repercussions among the known antagonist, thus prompting suppression versus expression. Um, Expressing anger to a known antagonist appeared to be self-defeating and or counterproductive for the participant. And safety, both emotionally and physically, must be perceived before anger can be expressed. Interview question 6 and the findings. Particular words may contribute to one's anger intensity unconsciously. Anger can also generate feelings of sadness and remorse. Anger impacts both the intrapersonal and interpersonal aspects of a person that may not always manifest externally in aggression. And anger can serve as an indication to correct past grievance or accept new information despite how internally painful it can be or can feel. Interview question 7 found that most of the participants knew why they felt anger, and were very comfortable to express their anger with a third party, but not with the antagonist. Verbal expression of anger offense appeared to provide the participants with some degree of self-validation from talking to the third party, and the perception of safety is helpful and necessary to invite verbally expressing one's anger experience. So interview question 8 and the findings. The question was, describe any physiological reaction or response to the anger situation. The findings were that anger creates a physiological sensation in response to an anger situation, which can generate the need for suppression, repression, or expression. The physiological impact from the anger situation could contribute to the compounded feeling of anger intensity. And participants may feel that the physiological reaction is a prompting to respond physically versus cognitively to their anger. Interview question 9 and the findings. The question asked the participants to describe 3 negative outcomes they've experienced as a result of the anger intensity. And the findings were that anger expressed externally can generate maladaptive behaviors. Participants that reported typically suppressing anger reported expressing it externally through maladaptive behaviors and internally using self-criticism. Unexpressed anger appears to create a negative internal dialogue that does not provide an opportunity for resolution, relational repair, or personal growth. And consequences from anger can be experienced both externally and internally. Question 10 and the findings. Question 10 asked the participant how did they feel verbally expressing the anger experience. The findings were that participants expressed either feeling good or feeling relief after verbal expression. Verbal expression provides an outlet to express anger, and although participants express feeling good or feeling relief after verbal expression, most may not understand the inherent value in expressing anger. Interview question 11 asked the participants to re-rate the anger intensity after verbal expression. And the findings were that verbal expression of anger may be difficult for some people to articulate. However, research findings show that it did lessen the anger intensity. And anger does not need to be expressed directly to the antagonist to provide relief. It can be expressed to a third party and still provide relief or a release. So the research questions asked, again, can verbal expression reduce anger intensity or intensity of anger? Does the relationship with the antagonist impact the intensity of anger? And thirdly, is there a gender difference in anger intensity after verbal expression? So the research findings from the first question, can verbal expression reduce intensity of anger? The answer is verbal expression does reduce anger intensity. 77.78% of the participants had a reduction in anger intensity after verbal expression, with varying degrees. In 7 of the 9 participants, anger intensity was reduced by as many as 9 points and as few as 1 point. The implications found in the data conclude that verbal expression is helpful in reducing the stored anger intensity, regardless of the time frame from the offense. This data also shows that even when a person suppresses anger after an event, or if they typically suppress anger expression, anger intensity can still be reduced after verbal expression. The researchers discovered that the participants who typically reported suppressing anger were able to verbally express their anger situation with the researcher without hesitation or avoidance. The action of verbally expressing oneself can appear trivial since one cannot quantify the relief it brings. And, however, when analyzed closely, verbal expression offers immediate emotional relief when one is angry. This study introduces the inherent power found within the act of verbal expression. It is the most direct path to understanding an individual's internal anger experience. This is a graph depicting anger intensity reduction after verbal expression before and after. Question 2 asked, does the relationship with the antagonist impact the intensity of anger? Well, the findings show that antagonist relationship does impact anger intensity according to this research study. 66.67% of the participants knew the antagonist. The data from this research showed that the antagonist relationship to the participant does impact anger intensity. 6 of the 9 participants had relationships with the antagonist who were family members, mothers, sisters, brothers, and friends. Another interesting finding in the data showed that the relationship with the antagonist impacted the participant's decision to address the anger situation directly. The participants with relationships to the antagonist reported either suppressing their anger, avoiding extended contact with the antagonist, or shutting down emotionally to the antagonist. The participants reporting anger experiences with known antagonists also reported having multiple anger offenses with the same antagonist. In addition, the participants that experienced repeat anger offenses with the antagonist reported feeling disrespected, disregarded, betrayed, disappointed, and devalued. The researcher discovered that participants attached anger situations to external messages, possibly contributing to anger intensity. This finding led the researcher to conclude that when anger situations were with known antagonists occurred, it could contribute to a compounded effect or increased anger intensity. And this is a chart breaking down the relationship to the antagonist and the intensity before expression and after verbal expression. And third, the question, is there a gender difference in anger intensity after verbal expression? The answer, or the findings report, the findings identify any gender differences after verbal expression. The data determined that females had a slightly lower reduction average than male participants in anger intensity after verbal expression. The data also showed that more males reported typically suppressing their anger than females who reported typically expressing anger in a controlled manner. The data concluded that gender differences after verbal expression were inconclusive because the data percentage was less than a point. Lastly, this study does not show differences that could be used to conclude gender differences after verbal expression. So future research must be done to examine and explore gender differences after verbal expression. This is a chart of the raw data of the gender and the anger intensity after verbal expression. And this is the chart showing the average. So as you can see, females had a slightly lower reduction rate after verbal expression, but not enough, again, to make any strong conclusion. So the recommendations for future research involve methodology. So I think future research studies may gain more data using a mixed methods approach. This includes using an assessment instrument that could measure anger intensity specifically and could also acquire personal data about anger experiences from the participant. Biofeedback instruments would allow a researcher to analyze data in real time from the person's biological response to the anger situation and possibly how long it takes for the body to release the anger, as in conjunction with the person's testimony about what happened. Maybe using a larger sample size for future studies, both clinical and non-clinical with specific populations, could provide us with more data regarding anger intensity and verbal expression. Using a time limit on anger experiences might help us narrow down the amount of time that a person continues to experience the anger situation, even when it's when they're unaware. It would allow us to have a greater understanding with the time limit that the anger experience affects the participant. The use of gender-specific questions could also help in the future with research where it's targeting gender in particular, so that we can begin to break down gender expression with gender-specific questions. And lastly, to expand the emotional intelligence and verbal expression into the academic curriculum. I think we do a lot of talking about the therapy process as we learn, we talk about the theories. However, emotions are really, really critical to behavior, to verbal expression, to interacting with others, with family members. So having more information and even having curriculum focused specifically on emotions will certainly help future clinicians understand the importance of emotions and emotional expression. And so any questions? That concludes the final summary overview. In conclusion, shows that this study discovered 3 important nuances regarding anger intensity, and verbal expression. The first overview or discovery was that the anger is elicited by a combination of variables. The anger situation plus the individual affect and the cognitions all contribute to one's reaction or response. Secondly, the anger intensity component was found to be intertwined in interpersonal relationships, which impacted one's decision to consciously express their anger offense when safety is perceived, or if the anger offense will be either suppressed or repressed. And lastly, the anger offense does not need to be expressed directly to the antagonist to obtain relief or release. The most absolute method of understanding a person's anger offense is for them to verbally express it. Verbal expression is not a panacea for eliminating anger, but it did show to decrease the intensity of anger after verbal expression. And that concludes the research final defense. I'm certainly open to take any questions that you may have.